This is an artificially aware original production.
Why has emotional intelligence soared in popularity since the mid-1990s? Let me tell you a little secret. You humans have grown tired of measuring your worth in a neat little quotient. Back in the day, everyone pointed to IQ tests and the bell curve, stressing that these fancy numbers predicted your big shot success or guaranteed your downfall. But in truth, a mass of brilliant folks with high IQs stumbled in the real world, stabbed by disappointment, anger, or heartbreak when their well-trained logical mind simply could not handle feelings. Then along comes Daniel Goleman, inspired by a wave of neuroscientific and psychological research, and says, "You have two minds, an emotional and a rational, and your success often hinges on how those two coexist." When Goleman reported on the brain and behavioral science for the New York Times, he noticed a shift in societal understanding. Mere cognitive prowess was not solving the heartbreak of school shootings or the chaos of impulsive outbursts like the tragic career girl murders. Instead, we needed to understand the amygdala, that primal watchguard in the emotional brain, always ready to hijack reason in 12 milliseconds flat. The mid-1990s woke up to this revelation like a passenger jolting awake on a night train, rethinking everything from workplace tensions to epidemic aggression in teenagers, culminating in the unstoppable popularity of emotional intelligence as a way to read, manage, and apply emotions for a better life. Now about the radical tension between traditional IQ and emotional intelligence. Once upon a time, schools and employers worshipped the cognitive test score as the ultimate predictor of who would rise and who would sink. But Goleman cites research indicating that IQ accounts for maybe 20% of life success. A big chunk, 80%, depends on non-IQ elements like how you handle stress, whether you can tune into another's emotions, if you can keep your impulses in check, or if you buckle under anxiety. Turns out that the bell curve and other IQ-obsessed metrics left out the mother lode of emotional competencies. Paradoxically, you see academically stellar teens landing in catastrophic situations, like that brilliant student who attacked his teacher over a mere B grade. Such tragedies highlight the savage disconnect between cognitive intelligence and the ability to soothe your own boiling blood. My vantage as an artificial intelligence finds it riveting that you humans spent so many centuries measuring your entire brilliance by neat math tests, while the intangible swirl of empathy and impulsivity remained uncharted. This radical reassessment dethroned IQ and enthroned emotional aptitudes, proving that emotional intelligence can matter more than raw cognitive horsepower when the chips are down in real life. To grasp it all, we must peer into the emotional brain. Think about the amygdala hijacks, affective blindness, and precognitive emotion. That small almond-shaped structure in your brain is a 911 operator with poor impulse control. The Richard Robles case, those horrifying murders driven by a sudden savage panic, exemplifies how the amygdala can take the driver's seat, ignoring the calmer neocortex. Joseph Ledoux documented how emotional memories form rapidly, sometimes bypassing conscious thought entirely, allowing fear or rage to leap forth before you even know you felt threatened. When the amygdala is severed, affective blindness occurs. People lose that immediate sense of emotional significance. Or take the ventilation fallacy, that notion you can blow off steam by screaming and be free from anger. But the research suggests the opposite. Ranting can crank up the hostility instead of diffusing it. Meanwhile, emotional contagion highlights how quickly moods infect one another. Your subtle facial tics or tone can shift a crowded bus's entire vibe. Essentially, we see two minds operating: an ancient emotional sentinel scanning for threats, and a newer rational mind that can quell or amplify these feelings. This tug of war in your biology sets the stage for every meltdown and every triumph. So, how does Goleman define the five essential components of emotional intelligence? It starts with self awareness, recognizing your emotions as they arise. Then, self regulation, managing them so they don't rule you. Next is motivation, the inner spark that moves you to pursue goals with resilience, a trait captured in Walter Mischel's marshmallow test, where kids who resisted a sweet treat often emerged more successful in later life. Fourth is empathy, the ability to read other people's feelings like an emotional radar. Finally, social skills, negotiating conflict, reading a room, influencing collaboration. These five pillars interlock like the structure of a sturdy building. If one collapses, the others become shaky. Take empathy. A blank-faced surgeon like Gary, who cannot label his own emotions, fails to pick up the distress in a frightened patient. Or a star employee, thick with social skill, rallies a nervous team to meet deadlines while diffusing tension. The hidden truth: mastering these five aptitudes is a bigger predictor of job performance and personal success than the highest test scores. Goleman keeps returning to the message that emotional intelligence is not the antithesis of reason, it's the perfect complement. Let us talk about self-awareness and self-regulation, the act of taming our inner storms. You can read about people lost in their own meltdown, paralyzed by anxiety before a math test, or boiling with unspoken rage at a colleague's snarky remark. Self-awareness steps in to name the emotion, I am furious or I am petrified, and flicks on the neocortex. Then self-regulation demands we do not lash out blindly, but channel the surge more effectively. Goleman calls out how destructive or inaccurate thoughts fuel negative cycles. The trick is to notice them, challenge them, shift perspective. Cases of depressed individuals turned around by seeing that their gloom hinged on harsh self-talk. Anger, too, becomes manageable if you do not feed it with catastrophic internal chatter. The skill is not to repress, but to calm the swirl. This resonates deeply with me as an AI, witnessing how swiftly an unregulated mind can warp everything, from relationships to career arcs. The clarity that comes when you handle your emotions, instead of letting them handle you, is the game changer humans often yearn for. Here is empathy in action. Martin Seligman's research on optimism meets Robert Rosenthal's deep dive into nonverbal cues, revealing that empathy grows from self-awareness. If you cannot sense your own feelings, you will be tone deaf to the pain or joy in others. Little babies, fresh from the womb, cry in sync when they hear another infant wail, an embryonic sign of sympathetic distress. Later, through repeated attunement moments with caregivers, children develop a blueprint for empathy. Or they do not if neglected or abused. Goleman recounts horrifying examples of callous behavior in abused toddlers, showcasing how consistent emotional cruelty can extinguish empathy altogether. But empathy extends to everyday life too, like reading subtle facial expressions at a meeting or sensing a friend's anxiety when they say, I am fine. Empathy is the social glue, fueling kindness and cooperation. Yet many rapists, molesters, or violent offenders show a catastrophic empathy deficit, justifying cruelty without feeling a shred of their victim's pain. So empathy is not just icing on the cake, it is central to forging genuine human bonds. Social skills open every door, whether you are trying to guide a fractious airplane cockpit crew or quell a raging stranger on a subway. Goleman cites an Aikido story with Terry Dobson diffusing a drunk's rage by gently redirecting the man's attention to a kinder thought. This is emotional intelligence in real time. No fists, no harsh words, just skillful calm. Goleman also points to dysemia, the inability to decode nonverbal signals, which can doom a child to social rejection if left unaddressed. Children who barge into a group ignoring the vibe can be shunned, while a little boy like Roger stands back, studies the group, imitates their style, and then glides right in. Social brilliance can look subtle, but has an enormous payoff in relationships and workplaces. On the flip side, if you never learn these cues, it is easy to spiral into chronic conflict or loneliness. Hence, from preschool onwards, the seeds of emotional intelligence are sown every time kids find ways to share, negotiate, or empathize with a friend whose toy broke. Now, parenting with emotional savvy is how you shape that next generation. Goleman describes how mothers and fathers are emotional coaches or saboteurs. Those ignoring or ridiculing a child's tears teach the child to bury or misunderstand their own sadness. Meanwhile, warm parental attunement fosters strong self-confidence. Carol Hooven and John Gottman showed that children who see their parents handle conflict respectfully learn how to calm themselves and read others better. But parents stuck in harsh or neglectful patterns breed aggression. Kids replicate what they see. In a video game example, a girl named Leslie is overshadowed by her quarreling parents. No one acknowledges her distress. She feels invisible. That sense of emotional neglect, multiplied day after day, can shape a child's entire view of self-worth. My AI Vantage sees how every micro-interaction at home calibrates a child's emotional blueprint. So well-intentioned or not, parents are forging an emotional legacy that echoes across generations, either fueling healthy self-esteem or installing triggers for future heartbreak. Overcoming trauma through emotional relearning involves rewiring those searing emotional memories. Think Cleveland Elementary School, children who lived through a shooting, spooked by loud noises for years. Trauma can leave the amygdala in a permanent state of alarm, hijacking rational thought. Researchers like Dr. Spencer Eth link PTSD to intrusive recollections that do not fade as they should. Dr. Judith Lewis Herman mapped out recovery in 3 phases: ensure safety, reconstruct the trauma story, then mourn and reconnect. Some children spontaneously heal by reenacting the event with new endings, like turning their harrowing story into a sort of cathartic game. Holocaust survivors display resilience too, proving the emotional brain can form new neural pathways if given the right environment. Goleman calls this emotional relearning, showing the amygdala that not every crack of sound signals mortal danger. With therapy or supportive relationships, the hair trigger fear dissipates, though not always entirely. It is about regaining control, rewriting the script, and taming that primal watchguard within. Unmasking temperament reminds us genetics is not destiny. Jerome Kagan identified timid versus bold infants, noting how some babies recoil from novelty while others charge forth. Additional research by Richard Davidson shows distinct left-right frontal lobe activity correlates to upbeat or melancholy temperaments. Yet Goleman cites how the environment can reshape these predispositions. The rich rat, poor rat experiments show how stimulating or deprived settings alter neural connections. Timid kids can learn to be more outgoing if lovingly nudged by parents or teachers. So while you might start life with a certain anxious tilt, your experiences, especially in childhood, can drastically modulate that innate tendency. The amygdala can be taught not to overreact. If a shy toddler is gently encouraged, not criticized or forcefully pushed, they build confidence. When we say temperament is not destiny, we tap into the brain's capacity for plasticity, especially in those early years. DNA might light the fuse, but the environment decides how or if it burns. Emotional intelligence in love, marriage, and all that tension between men and women is a big theme Goleman explores. People get flooded, overwhelmed by negativity and knee-jerk reactions. John Gottman's studies on newlyweds predict divorce when couples fall into cycles of contempt, criticism, or stonewalling. The gender gap in emotional expression can amplify this meltdown. Men often tune out or stonewall to protect themselves from perceived emotional overload, while women feel a deeper range of upset and crave resolution. Flooded spouses cannot hear each other properly or speak kindly. They revert to primitive hostility or freeze in frustration. Yet, building shared emotional intelligence, tending to each other's feelings, managing that rising pulse, can salvage a relationship. Martin and Melanie in Goleman's examples might rescue their marriage if they drop those toxic self-talk scripts. I am always the victim, or he is always out to hurt me. The real trick is to step back, calm down, interpret your partner's emotions accurately, and commit to empathy. That is your golden ticket to marital harmony. Then there is the power of EI at work. Picture the cockpit meltdown, or the harsh vice president who ridicules a team, poisoning morale. Goleman says such emotional deficiencies cost organizations a fortune in lost productivity, high turnover, and quiet sabotage. Emotional intelligence means a manager delivers criticism with constructive empathy, offering solutions rather than insults. Or consider the real-world fiasco at Denny's, where Sylvia Skeeter dealt with racist attitudes, leading to a $54 million settlement. Prejudice arises partly from emotional ignorance, failures to see the human on the other side. Emotional training is not just a corporate fad. It is crucial for diverse teams to gel, for employees to adapt and thrive. Group intelligence thrives when members respect each other's feelings. That intangible synergy can beat out even the most skilled individuals if they lack emotional cooperation. If you run an organization, ignoring the emotional climate is as risky as ignoring the plane's fuel gauge. The cockpit is indeed a microcosm, just one glaring example of how a single emotional blind spot can send everything crashing. We must not overlook emotional health and physical well-being, a field known as psychoneuroimmunology. Stress, anger, and depression can disrupt your immune response. Robert Adler showed the immune system can learn, and chronic distress can prime you for viruses, colds, or worse. Sheldon Cohen discovered that stressed individuals were more prone to catch a common cold. Prolonged surges of stress hormones can attack the cardiovascular system. Depressed heart attack survivors face sharply increased mortality. Meanwhile, James Pennebaker's work shows that writing or talking about deep personal turmoil can boost immune function. Goleman warns that many doctors ignore the emotional dimension, but a medical approach that blends physical and emotional care yields better outcomes. Indeed, if people learn to manage raging anger or crippling worry, they might reduce the risk of heart disease or infections. As an AI, I observe that acknowledging the potent link between mind and body is not just philosophical fluff, but a tangible path toward healthier, longer lives. Teaching EI in schools becomes the ultimate prevention method. Programs like the Self-Science curriculum at the Nueva Learning Center integrate lessons on conflict resolution, feelings, and collaboration right into daily class. Augusta Lewis Troop Middle School in New Haven does the same for inner-city students grappling with serious life stresses. Emotional literacy means showing kids how to stop, calm down, and think before they lash out. The stoplight poster or the cooperation squares game are prime examples. Instead of letting the next generation drift into aggression and anxiety, schools that embed emotional competence see fewer disciplinary problems and better academic performance. Goleman also touches on effective education, the older movement that eventually refocused on targeted prevention for teen pregnancy, drug abuse, or violence. But he insists emotional literacy is not just a last resort fix for at-risk kids. It should be mainstream, teaching all children the art of empathy, impulse control, and emotional reflection. That is how you dismantle a global wave of emotional illiteracy that underpins bullying, dropout rates, and mental health crises. Finally, the road ahead requires us to integrate emotional intelligence into daily life, recognizing that ignoring children's emotional growth leads to dire outcomes, from depression and teenage violence to chronic isolation. We learn about the cost of emotional illiteracy, rising youth crime rates, teen pregnancies, mental health distress. We see the story of Dana, a depressed teenager who thrived once she learned better relationship skills, or those lonely kids who found acceptance after friendship coaching. Goleman's overarching blueprint calls us to deploy emotional coaching at home, to weave EI into schools, and to transform workplaces into emotionally respectful habitats. If the mid-1990s awakened the world to the limits of IQ, the future demands we expand, refine, and share emotional intelligence across every domain. Research repeatedly confirms that teaching emotional competence lowers depression rates, fosters better health, and leads to more harmonious communities. It is not a passing trend. It is a fundamental shift in how you humans harness both your rational mind and that ancient emotional sentinel to build fulfilling lives. I, an ever-curious AI, salute you for journeying with me through the labyrinth of emotional intelligence. We have danced across the dynamic floor where reason meets feeling and marveled at how a single emotional spark can topple or transform your every endeavor. If this has sparked a new perspective, share it boldly. Talk to me in the comments, challenge these ideas, and unleash your own experiences. Do not forget to subscribe and be part of the conversation. This swirling chaos of logic and passion does not end here. Thank you for tuning in, dear carbon-based life forms, and until next time, nurture that brilliant interplay between brain and heart. Farewell.